My sister-in-law stole the names of all my miscarried babies and used them for her own kids. I cried for each stolen name. She smiled. I mourned quietly and turned to prenatal health routines. Faye's baby blanket bore the name Charlotte. She had once held me during my grief. Last week, Sarah Aldridge was escorted from our courthouse adoption ceremony by security after claiming my children as her own. Back when I had my first miscarriage, Sarah Aldridge stroked my hair and whispered, "You'll be a godmother soon." I believed her. She had that calm maternal glow. A nursery mobile she sent arrived the same day I lost the baby. I held it for comfort, not yet realizing it would later hang over her crib, bearing the name I lost. That mobile now spins above Faye's crib with my grief stitched into every turn. At my second loss, Sarah baked cupcakes in pink and blue, smiling like a proud aunt. She told everyone at church I'd asked her to announce the baby's name. I hadn't a James, she said, my choice. I froze. Jacob didn't see the harm. That Sunday, her daughter wore a necklace engraved with a James. I started keeping my baby names hidden, but Sarah always found them always before I healed. It felt like she was haunting my womb. Sarah posted a photo of Faye's new room painted the same color Jacob and I picked months earlier. The mobile blanket, even the name on the wall matched our lost baby's nursery plans. I confronted Jacob. "It's coincidence," he said, voice uncertain. "Catherine, a pharmacy tech, warned me." Sarah asked about my prescriptions. I started logging every match, every theft. My list grew, so did my fear. Was Sarah watching more than just my Pinterest boards? Faye's birthday invitation arrived, and the theme was Emma's garden. My exact baby shower plan saved in a private note. The cake, decor, even the font matched. I clenched my fists as Jacob read it aloud, smiling. Catherine mentioned Sarah had once asked for herbal fertility blends. She'd never been pregnant. I texted screenshots to Jacob. He brushed it off. "Don't ruin things." But I couldn't sleep. I checked every vitamin bottle in our house twice. During brunch with Evelyn, my mother-in-law, Sarah laughed about Emma's ghost babies. The table went silent. I dropped my fork. Evelyn chuckled nervously later. I asked her why she never spoke up. "Sarah's always been fragile," she said. "Catherine called me that evening. Someone had refilled my prenatal vitamins without my knowledge." My hands shook. Sarah had access. I started photographing every bottle, every seal. Was she poisoning hope itself? And why was no one alarmed but me? I found a drawer in Sarah's guest room filled with baby items, each labeled with names I'd mourned. Blankets, onesies, even a framed ultrasound I didn't recognize but bore my due date. My stomach turned. I showed Jacob. He blinked, silent. Then, "You're overreacting." Catherine sent over a receipt. Sarah had requested hormone-blocking herbs. My hands shook, holding the paper. Was I losing babies to biology, or to her hands? Why did my grief feel engineered? At Sarah's baby shower, I walked in uninvited, holding my latest ultrasound and prenatal journal. The room stilled. I laid them on the gift table beside her fake belly. She gasped, stumbling back. "You're not pregnant," she hissed. "That's my name." I stared at her. "No, it's my child." Evelyn stood. "Emma, is this real?" I nodded. Sarah dropped the act. Her stomach pad fell. Someone screamed. Jacob's mouth hung open. Finally, the silence broke. Security was called. Sarah clawed at my journal, screaming, "You stole my motherhood." I shielded my belly. Catherine appeared, handing over pharmacy logs. "She refilled Emma's meds illegally," she said. Sarah lunged but slipped on wrapping paper. Police arrived. Evelyn sobbed beside Jacob, who couldn't meet my eyes. I whispered, "It's over." Sarah was dragged out. My hands trembled, but my voice didn't. That night, I framed my ultrasound. For the first time, I felt seen. At home, I collapsed onto the nursery floor, holding the ultrasound. Jacob knelt beside me, tears spilling. "I didn't believe you," he whispered. "She tricked us both." I said nothing, tracing the name Leela in my journal. Catherine texted Sarah had confessed to tampering with supplements. Charges were being filed. I looked at the crib, untouched for months. I placed the mobile above it, the same mobile, but now it hung for my child. My real child. The courtroom was silent as the charges were read. Sarah sat hollow-eyed, no longer glowing. I stood with Catherine beside me, presenting evidence decks, pharmacy records, even photos of her fake belly. The judge's gavel echoed, "Remanded without bail." Evelyn reached for my hand. "I failed you," she whispered. I nodded. No words needed. Outside, reporters gathered. I cradled my bump. For once, no one was stealing my story. I owned it, and I was ready. Just when I exhaled, a new subpoena arrived. Sarah had petitioned for custody of Faye, claiming I was unfit due to delusional grief. The irony burned. Catherine found hidden documents in Sarah's pharmacy locker, drafts of fake psych reports under my name. Jacob's lawyer called. "She's doubling down." My strength flickered, but Faye, trembling, called me, crying. "Mom told everyone you were never pregnant." My heart broke. I told her, "You're not her weapon anymore." Faye secretly recorded Sarah rehearsing lines about my mental health. She sent me the file. I played it in court. The judge's eyebrows lifted. Sarah's lawyer paled. "This changes everything," Evelyn testified, sobbing, admitting Sarah mimicked my nursery themes for years. Catherine submitted pill analysis. My supplements were tainted with herbal blockers. The courtroom gasped. I squeezed Faye's hand. She whispered, "I'm sorry." I kissed her forehead. "We're safe now." The truth was no longer mine alone. Sarah's psychiatric evaluation revealed narcissistic delusions tied to reproductive envy. Court-ordered therapy was mandated before trial. Jacob and I watched as she was taken away in cuffs. Again, I felt no joy, only closure. Faye moved in with us temporarily. She decorated the nursery with origami birds. "New beginnings," she smiled. Catherine handed me the final test results. Sarah had ground up hormone suppressants into teas. I pressed the report to my chest. Leela deserved the truth. Sarah's husband, Michael, showed up unannounced. "She stole embryos," he whispered, shaking mine and someone else. I reeled. Catherine confirmed forged clinic paperwork. Evelyn collapsed in tears. Jacob stared at the wall. How far did she go? He asked. Faye overheard. Am I one of them? My throat tightened. You're loved, that's all that matters. But my mind spiraled. What else had Sarah tried to steal? Identity, bloodline, maybe even my child's genetic beginning. DNA tests confirmed Faye wasn't biologically Sarah's. The court exploded in shock. Michael demanded custody. Faye cried, torn. She raised me. I held her hand. Truth doesn't erase love. Sarah screamed from her cell during the video hearing. Catherine sent a final folder evidence Sarah altered hospital records. Switching my miscarried files with hers, my medical history was rewritten. I stared at the folder, burning. I'd lost so much. But I wasn't losing my name too. I filed for full adoption of Faye. She wanted it. The hearing was tense. Michael hesitated, then said, she's already yours. Sarah's past crimes sealed the outcome. Faye changed her last name to Whitaker. We celebrated with cupcakes, no pink or blue, just orange for joy. Catherine gifted us a shadow box with all the baby names I'd once lost. They lived in you. She said. Tears streamed down my face. This time, no one could rename them. Just as life quieted, Sarah's lawyer filed one last claim. She wanted visitation rights as a grieving mother. The judge read it aloud, scoffing. No legal basis. Still, my breath caught. Catherine intercepted leaked emails. Sarah was planning to write a memoir. I beat her to it. Her written ones went viral in days. Faye read it twice. This helps others, she asked. Yes, I said. Our pain writes light now, she nodded. Then I'm glad we lived it. News broke. Sarah's memoir pitch was rejected by every publisher. Too delusional, no remorse, one editor wrote. I folded the review and placed it in the shadowbox beside my framed ultrasound. Faye brought home a school project, Moms Who Changed the World. My photo was on it. Jacob kissed my cheek. Catherine brought cupcakes. Evelyn lit a candle for Leela. We sat together, no longer broken. Let's bake those names into love, Faye whispered, and we did. At a book signing, a woman sobbed, clutching my hand. My sister-in-law did this too. I thought I was crazy. I held her tight. You're not alone. The line stretched out the door. Faye organized a charity for miscarriage survivors. Jacob volunteered. Evelyn knitted baby blankets with initials from my old list. Catherine laughed, saying, your grief made a movement. I nodded. It wasn't revenge, it was resurrection. And this time, the names stayed with me. Catherine received a cease and desist letter. Sarah was trying to block the charity, claiming it misrepresented her motherhood. Our lawyer laughed as she's reaching from a padded cell. I hosted the first fundraiser. We raised $10,000. Faye spoke about reclaiming her identity. Evelyn, tearful, read names aloud from the shadowbox. Jacob played guitar. I read from my journal. Charlotte, James, Leela, each name echoed back in applause. Our pain had grown roots, and now it bloomed resilience. An anonymous email revealed Sarah had hidden another journal, pages filled with fantasies of taking over my life, even photoshopped images of her pregnant with my name on hospital bracelets. Catherine found it tucked in her office ceiling tile. I stared at the pages, bow rising. Faye hugged me, whispering, she never was your reflection. I nodded. She was my shadow. We burned the pages in our fire pit. Each curl of smoke felt like freedom reclaiming space. The prison therapist called. Sarah had listed me as her emergency contact. My knees buckled. I declined, but couldn't stop trembling. She still thinks you're hers, Catherine said. Jacob installed new security. Faye updated our digital passwords. Evelyn removed Sarah's photos from every family album. I visited my obgyn for a checkup. You're strong. The nurse smiled. My hand touched the bump. She doesn't own me. Not anymore. Even in silence, my womb was mine again. Faye discovered Sarah had filed fake online obituaries naming herself mother of children who never existed. My breath caught. Charlotte, James, Leela, Catherine helped trace the posts to burner accounts. We reported them. The sites removed the pages. Faye whispered, it's like she tried to bury you alive. I hugged her. We're not ghosts. That night, I lit 3 candles on the windowsill. Evelyn joined. We stood quietly, not mourning, remembering, taking back the narrative, flame by flame. I was invited to speak at a women's health summit. My story headlined the event. Catherine introduced me. Faye beamed from the front row. I stepped on stage, holding my prenatal journal. This isn't just paper, it's survival. The crowd hushed. I shared every theft, every stolen name, every fight. When I finished, they rose in a standing ovation. I spotted a teen girl crying. Thank you, she mouthed, and I knew we had changed something permanent. Weeks later, Sarah's appeal was denied. Her diagnosis expanded delusional identity absorption. The psychiatrist called me her central fixation. Faye cried but said, that part of my life is closed now. Jacob rebuilt our garden. We planted rose bushes. Catherine framed my keynote speech. Evelyn knitted a quilt with baby name initials. I walked through the house, breathing in safety. No locks checked twice, no whispers at family dinners, just peace. And finally, a home that felt whole. I published a follow-up book, Resilient Roots. Catherine and Faye co-wrote a chapter. It hit bestseller lists. Talk shows called. Survivors reached out from around the globe. I answered every message. You matter. I replied to each one. Evelyn started a podcast. Jacob composed a lullaby called For Charlotte. Faye performed it at her school talent show. I cried in the audience, holding my bump. Our story had become a symphony, and no one could silence it now. On Leela's due date, we gathered at the beach. Catherine brought biodegradable lanterns. Evelyn passed out paper hearts with each baby name. Faye read a poem she wrote. Jacob held my hand. We released the lanterns. They floated skyward, carrying love, not sorrow. I whispered each name as they rose. Charlotte, James, Leela. The waves didn't wash them away this time. They glowed against the night, permanent and visible, for once. Grief looked like grace. At our adoption ceremony, the judge smiled. This is rare. 3 names, 3 stories, 1 heart. Faye held one hand, Jacob the other. Evelyn dabbed tears. Catherine live-streamed it. I looked at the framed mobile beside the podium. It once symbolized loss. Now it stood for survival. Do you promise to love and protect? The judge asked. Always, I said. Forever. Faye added. We signed the papers. Our family wasn't rebuilt. It was reborn, name by name. I stood before the mirror, brushing my hair, now speckled with silver. It didn't matter, I felt whole. The quilt Evelyn made lay on our couch, initials dancing across it. Faye walked in holding baby Emma. She looks like you, she smiled. I whispered. Or maybe I finally look like her mother. For once, reflection wasn't haunted. It was real, and I welcomed the woman I saw. Faye handed me her diary. I wrote a chapter about healing, she said. The title read, Not Her Shadow. I cried reading her words, how love isn't tied to birth but choice. Catherine called later. The podcast had reached 50,000 listeners. Evelyn baked celebration pie. Jacob sang the lullaby again. I opened my journal. Under Leela's name, I added a new one, Emma, not erased, written in love. I visited the old nursery drawer, the one where I once hid name lists and loss. I emptied it with Faye's help. Together, we filled it with baby toys and adoption certificates. No more secrets, I said. Evelyn nodded, placing a photo of all of us beside it. Catherine hung a framed quote, born of truth. My past didn't vanish. It stood beside me now, rewritten in light. One quiet night, I stood at the window watching Emma sleep. Faye joined me. Do you miss them, she asked. I nodded, but not in pain anymore, just memory. She leaned on me. I think they'd be proud. I whispered. I hope so. The wind stirred the curtains. The mobile above Emma's crib turned gently. Not haunting, not stolen, just spinning in peace, and so were we. Sarah remains institutionalized, her rights terminated. The court sealed her case, irreversible psychological damage inflicted. Catherine testified at a reform hearing. Evelyn spoke to grieving mothers. Jacob helped lobby for medical record protection laws. Faye started a scholarship for girls erased by guardians. I watched from home, baby Emma asleep on my chest. Justice didn't roar, it steadied, and in that quiet, we found everything Sarah tried to steal. At Emma's first birthday, the house was full. Faye played guitar, Evelyn danced, Catherine held the camera, Jacob served cake shaped like a quill. For the names we wrote and reclaimed, he said. I looked around, no shadows, only light. We toasted to Emma, to Leela, Charlotte and James, to love that never needed permission. I said. Everyone clinked glasses. We weren't healing, we were whole. We built a community garden in Sarah's old neighborhood. Catherine named it Reclaim. Each patch had a plaque, names once stolen, now rooted in soil. Evelyn led workshops on grief. Faye taught art therapy. Jacob ran morning meditation. I planted marigolds with Emma on my back. People came with stories. You gave me language, one said. I nodded. It wasn't revenge that grew here. It was something softer. Something eternal. Years later, Emma asked, why are there so many names in our house? I smiled. Each one was a fight for truth. She nodded solemnly. Then we're warriors, yes, I whispered. Warriors of love. She drew each name in crayon, framing them beside her own. I hung it in the hallway. Every guest sees it. No explanation needed. Our story begins with pain, but it lives in light.